Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Who are we talking to today?
Today we're going to talk to a engineer mix recorder guy named Tim Benson, who we got turned on to by Mark Matthews. And that's about all I know about him. And he is in the UK, so let's get with it.
All right, let's do this.
Mike's on Mike's. Yeah.
Well, it looks like you've got your act together. Look at that nice microphone and headphones.
It's
That's
like
Well,
he's
yeah,
a it's like he's a professional or something.
yeah. It's almost like I'm a sound engineer. Yeah,
you've done this.
indeed. Yeah, how you all keeping? Good.
Good. So I'm Mike Nimix
I'm Mike Dow, and that's
Right.
Tim.
from Opus Studios.
I sort of work under that and under the guys these days as Isle9 as a producer as well, an artist. So it's morphed into more than just Opus Studios, but Opus Studios was what I've been working under for years now. Yeah.
So tell us how we got connected with you.
It was through my good friend Mark Matthews from I think you had him on from the podcast, Inside the Mix podcast, and he's also a producer. So that's how we connected.
How do you know Mark?
I think it's really through the synth wave, synth pop sort of scene. That's how we connected. Basically, he also lives quite close to me geographically. So we connected online and sort of got chatting because we're sort of involved with the similar kind of artists and making similar music. And then I actually realised he was just down the road in Exeter. It's not very far from me, about an hour away. So we used to meet up, and we still do, for like a burger and a beer and a chat through,
Nice.
all the joys of being a sound engineer.
Very cool. No, I love kind of organic connections like that. So
And he put me onto you two. So that's, other than that, we're all new to each other, aren't we? So that's good.
yes. So you've been doing this for a while.
I have. Yeah.
Which kind of made me reflect on Mike and I. And then I'm like, oh, wait, we've been doing this, not this podcast, but just the whole pro audio music stuff for a while now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, everybody that we like and know and talk to has been doing this for a while. But let's go back to the beginning a little bit. What kind of
Sure.
first got you into this? Was it a childhood thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess music itself started off somewhere around, I think I was quite late to it in a way, like sort of 12, 13. I kind of started to really get into music. My sister sort of had a guitar. She used to strum a few chords. She played the French horn unbelievably badly, but at the end of the day, I don't think I realised just how difficult the French horn is to play either. So there we go. But but yes, I used to listen to that going on, and my dad was sort of, he taught some sort of choirs and done some stuff like that. He was very musical, but in a very classical tradition, and it was very much he had to have notes in front of him, and he could sit at the piano and play stuff. So he was pretty into church music, really, and into classical music. So there wasn't any pop music or anything like that going on in our house at all. I think my mum occasionally might have listened to the Beatles or John Denver, but it was pretty sparse on that front. And suddenly, sort of age 12, 13, obviously your friends are listening to stuff and starting to, there was music on TV. There was like Top of the Pops, but I wouldn't have like records around. I wouldn't have my dad's record collection to go through. So anyway, sort of around 12, 13, I started to listen to music that my friends were giving me and whatever. And then, yeah, it just happened. I sort of picked up my sister's guitar one day and thought, what can I do on this? And started to just mess around, and oddly discovered that I could play it better than her within a fairly short time. She wasn't great, but it was just a matter of picking up a chord book, following the chords, piecing it together. So, yeah, it just happened sort of fairly organically at first. I think I just had a musical ear and I could pick things up. I then started to pick up a bit of piano and that sort of thing. And then at some point, I don't quite remember how it all rolled into, sort of starting up bands and things like that. But, before you knew it, I had a band that were rehearsing in my parents' living room every Saturday. And my parents were leaving us to like rehearse and jam. So that, I'm sure this is pretty standard stuff. I think a lot of people start this way in your teens, and you just like sort of jamming with friends and things. But then we started to do a little bit of gigs, they were pretty terrible, but like it was just friends and things, and found a guitar teacher who I did 6 months with him, and he taught me really, again, he was willing to sort of let me work by ear, but then taught me some theory and other bits. And then that was about it formally. I didn't really get much more teaching than that. I mean, and I just sort of made my way from there into music. And I guess the next stage was probably busking. I started busking on the guitar when I was probably about 16, 17. I just like, I'd noticed buskers on the street and thought, oh, well, do they make money? Is there somewhere make it? I was keen to make a few quid. So I just like got out with my guitar one day, and a friend, actually, I was too shy to sing at the time, but I got a friend to sing. And I couldn't believe it. We were pretty terrible, but we made some money, played some Simon and Garfunkel, played some Beatles, played some really well-known stuff, probably quite badly, but we made some money. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something in this. So I just gradually, I got into maybe I should sing too. And I just kind of got into going out there, got a little bit of a set together. And, I was discovering that friends were doing sort of boring Saturday jobs and they're having to work. And I was going like, oh, well, I'll just go busking for a couple of hours, meet up with a few friends, have a beer and, and a coffee and an afternoon out, sort of just chatting with people and playing guitar, and oddly make a little bit of money. So I started to sort of go, this is quite a good way to supplement studying and all the rest of it, because I went on and studied at art college at that point, and into fine art at the time, painting and drawing, and kept doing music all the way through, kept being in bands, jam nights, busking, absolutely everything I could do. I was just madly into playing guitar, really. Bit of drums. Drums was something I picked up sort of early on, but I think people wanted me to be in the band because they didn't have a drummer. But honestly, I discovered people were better at drums than I was, and I preferred playing guitar, and playing with a drummer. But yeah, you did a bit of that as well, so drumming as well in there. And then I think the recording thing then took seed somewhere towards the end of university, really. I think I'd even played around with it, like even from the early stages of being in the band. I got a ghetto blaster and just like popped it on in the corner and just like record boombox or whatever and just recorded us. It was pretty, but I was interested by where I put it and what made it sound better and how I could improve, just where we positioned ourselves in the room. So I guess that was a very early seed of being interested in recording itself. But like somewhere around probably 21, 22, something like that, at university, I borrowed someone's 4-track, the standard old Porter Studio, the Tascam Porter Studio. Many people, have had one of them. And so that was the real beginning of the bug. And I was just into sort of putting in tapes and different tapes and how they sounded and how many tracks. Well, I could record all 4 tracks, and then I could bounce down internally, but then I could also, of course, like record out to another cassette machine and then put that back in and record another few. And that seemed to be slightly better quality. And, I was messing around with all these things. And I mean, I think I had I've still got one actually hiding somewhere in the back there. I bought another one.
Porter Studio?
No, like a little Echo Pet. It's just like a little Bucket Brigade delay, which I picked up somewhere in a junk shop. And and that was my only effects unit, I think, at the time. I used to plug through it and use that, and very basic microphones. I mean, I had some sort of dynamic mic, but it wasn't even a 58 or anything. It was just whatever I could get hold of, and I had a PZM. I remember using one of them or a pair of PZMs. They're the sort of boundary mics, kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, the trouble was they needed an excessive amount of gain to get much out of them. But if you made enough noise into them, they were great and they were quite interesting. So, and I borrowed someone's Yamaha. It was like before the DX7, there was a Yamaha music computer. I think it's a C something. Oh, I can't remember the actual model of it, but it was like literally, it was like a. I think am I right in saying that the Yamaha sort of, I think back then it was like two operator FM synth or something, or a 3 operator. It was a very, very basic version before, they came out with
6.5.
Yeah, it might have been that. Yeah, it was like a computer, and
It's got a computer keyboard, but it's got
yeah,
and
yeah, that's right. And it was crazy that you actually had to record in, sort of work with the computer to actually make any sounds. There were no presets, anything. So I was just desperately trying to make, for instance, a bass sound or something very simple. But, I think I ended up with everything sounding like a bell sound in the end, probably. But when you
FM.
don't know what FM for you, exactly. But, so I got that was a bit sort of interesting, sort of messing around with a synth in there. And yeah, and just recording like anything down a microphone that made a sound, really. It was very inventive period because I had so little in the way of gear. I just had to be creative with what I did. But I loved it, the double tracking of an acoustic or something like that. And, the trying different things out. Borrowed someone's pedals. They had some pedals, interesting pedals, Boss stuff, and this kind of thing. So yeah, it was very basic, and I used to take that around actually, and I started to do some recordings in different environments with it as well, and things like that. I recorded. This sounds crazy, but a group of friends and I sat under the ground in literally at the back of a farm. There was just a hole in the ground. You went down, and there was what would have been an old cellar, I guess, but it was really small, tiny. You could hardly get your head, you stand up in it, probably about sort of 5.5 feet tall. And, we just literally put all our kit in the cellar, run some power to it. And no one could really hear us in there, which is a great thing. And we all sat there with acoustic instruments mainly and mics and my 4-track. And we spent a whole week recording an album. This was the plan. I don't think the album ever existed, but
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the good thing about that is that if nobody can hear you, then most likely you can't hear anybody else. So
no, that's true.
You've got yourself a really good sound isolation studio type environment. The low ceilings probably caused a little bit of weird reverb boxiness, but that was probably a pretty great place to record.
Yeah, it was a fun place to try. It was a bit cold and damp at times, but but the thing is, you couldn't hear much. But then every now and then, I remember some point at 5 o'clock in the morning or something, putting the mics outside and recording the sound of the birds coming up whilst this guy tried to play this lovely acoustic thing that he'd written. And, so it was a very inventive period, even if what I produced I don't really have, or like nothing really happened to it. I think I was definitely just exploring the whole fun of making music with friends, and also recording it and how to make sound and how to record it. And yeah, as I say, with limited equipment. So it was you had to be inventive. But that was definitely the beginnings of me just getting into recording and sound and production, but not in a serious way at that point, but it grew into something and never left, really. So
I think you're touching on something that's pretty important about when you consider studio design, because you could design a studio that is perfect, just the right amount of everything sound wise, but
yeah,
that's not conducive to creativity. And so creating an ambiance, and I think we've all done this, right? And we're just kind of subconsciously, we've put the lava lamp in the corner, dimmed the lights. But you being out in nature like that, that's a whole different thing. It's like, we've got all of this extra input coming in to spark our
Yeah.
creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, you have maybe more to deal with there than when you're in a controlled environment, like, but yeah, I definitely, I think that's something I've always kept in mind is because I am sort of at heart a creative person myself, and a musician, that I think it's really helped later on as I began to produce other people, that I understood their process. I understood their frustrations. I understood how, you know, it wasn't just a technical thing. It was about getting the performance out of the drummer. It didn't matter if you got the best tuned drum kit and he was, sort of a brilliant technician and you put the mics in all the right places. If you weren't getting that performance out of him, his best, and it wasn't connecting with the track, then you weren't doing a great job. So, and how to do that was often more psychology than anything else, how to, sort of put people at ease and, get that creative vibe in the studio and in the environment. And that's definitely an important thing to do. Yeah, not one you can learn from a textbook, I don't think.
Mike and I have run into this because we both used to work in video, and I guess we still do a little bit, is that when you show up to an interview, you have choices to make. These days, it doesn't really matter what kind of camera you show up with, but you show up with a giant, what we would call an ENG camera broadcast thing that, just behemoth with bells and whistles and red light and everything, and you point that at somebody, they get nervous and clam up. They're not ready to talk to you. Like, throw them in front of a bunch of lights and everything. They're like, this is scary and new and no thanks. And so, but if you can, like everybody's got a DSLR now. So you put them in front of a little tiny camera, almost hide it from them. Then at the end of the day, they're way more comfortable and it's not a giant lens in their face. Same thing with microphones. You give somebody an SM58 that they've seen a million times, right? And people on stage use these, whatever. They've seen them in auditoriums. Their high school principals have been talking into them. These sorts of things versus a U87, in a quiet booth and like all attention is on them and they'll like, deer in headlights. This is not what you want in a performance.
No, yeah, absolutely. That sort of nervous sort of state as soon as they're in a studio, I think, as soon as you're in that environment. I mean, a lot of times as well, people are like, oh no, it's costing us by the hour and we're here and we've got to bring our A game and it's got to be great. And as soon as they get in that mindset, you've lost them from being relaxed and creative. So yeah, you've got to get them back into that. But at the same time, yeah, here's a beer. Yeah. Yeah. So somehow at the same time, you've got to not lose productivity. You've got to keep that going because they are saying, well, we've got 2 or 3 days to make this and we haven't got unlimited budget. EMI is not paying for this. And they, they want, or even if EMI is paying for it, someone at the other end of the line is going to want the product out and done and within a certain time frame. So yeah, you've got to kind of relax at the same time as getting the job done, which can be tricky. But yeah,
it can.
Yeah. Are there any special psychological techniques that you have found work better than most over the years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One thing I found that works quite well is like I would sort of refer back to the musician themselves and try and get them involved in how they make the best sound. So like an example would be like I had like a guy who was playing on a sort of hand drum and he was just like, obviously he wanted the best sound out of this. So I said, well, where does this sound nice to you? Where do you enjoy playing this? And he was like, oh, actually, I really love the sound of this in my car. And I was like, right, okay. And he had a tiny little car. He was like, yeah, so this drum sounds brilliant when I'm sitting in the car. And and I said, right, okay, let's go out to your car. So we took the drum out to his car and he played it in the car. And I said, that sounds brilliant. I love that. So I took a microphone out and I ran the microphone out the studio to the car. And then I sort of, like, gave him some headphones as well and ran out a monitor feed. And then we all sat in the studio recording him playing in his car, which I wouldn't do that with everything. But, I think that's the thing. What environment makes you feel better? So you're singing the vocal. Okay, is it better when I've had like joss sticks, the lights down, and I'm sure other people do that. But like, it's just that whole thing of what makes you feel more comfortable, and trying to go for it's where they feel they perform best. Like, oh yeah, I mean, it's like, who hasn't done that where you sort of writing a song or something on a guitar, and you find oddly you write the song on the stairs or something, or you write it somewhere really odd. You sit somewhere and, in the garden, whatever, and that is a good place to write. And I think you can echo that in the recording environment as well, and try and put people at ease rather than, as you say, it's just the camera thing, isn't it? It's the same thing of not shoving a big lens in someone's face, and it's going like, that's not very calming, sort of, so let's put you in a different mindset, really. But
I used to put a piece of black gaffer tape over the red light on the cameras, and I would set up and I would just say, okay, before we get started, I just want to talk about some of this, and just kind of get into the interview. And then at one point they're kind of going, we're going to do this. I'm like, yeah, it's done. And then another cool thing was, people, if they're nervous in the beginning, at the end of the interview, they're usually loosened up and answering questions better and seem more relaxed and less robotic. I would go and repeat the first 1, 2, or 3 questions, because it's going to get edited anyway.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It just won't seem as cold.
And some of those can translate to music too, recording rehearsals. We used to do stuff in the studio, and there was a DAT recorder in the corner that was always on.
Yeah.
I mean, now you can just have a computer, but, and so somebody would be just screwing around and be like, oh, that's cool, we should have recorded that. And it's kind of like, yeah, well, we did.
We did. Yeah.
That reminds me a little, I want to touch on what kind of DAW you have. Mike and I have used Cubase, and nowadays in Cubase, they have retroactive MIDI recording for very reason. So you can be playing around as long as it's MIDI through the DAW, and then you're like, oh man, that was really cool. Well, there you go. It's it was remembering a MIDI note or nothing.
Same concept.
I use Cubase as well, actually. Yeah, I'm a Cubase user. I've used Cubase since it was on an Atari, so that was very,
I was going to ask what your first version was. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, so God, I don't know what number that was, but like on Atari, but like version whatever it was on Atari. I remember. I
want to say it was 2 for some reason, but
pre-DST
clearly.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just a MIDI thing at that point. Obviously, you couldn't do anything else but MIDI on it, and in the Atari days, and you were lucky if you could do more than about 16 tracks of that. But no, the Atari was pretty solid. I mean, like, it only had like, I think 2 meg or 4 meg if you extend it of memory, and it, you had to put a floppy disk in, load it up off floppy disk, and then basically it was best to just leave it on once it was going. Just don't touch it for like ever, and save regularly. But
the reason to use the Atari, it had like built-in MIDI ports, right?
Yes, built-in MIDI with arguably very good timing to it. The MIDI, it just, like, I think for years after PC came in, I don't think it's now a concern, but like the kind of PC sort of, to MIDI kind of conversion and everything, there was something about the timing. People used to go on about it, that it didn't feel as solid.
It was not.
As it used to on Atari. And I knew people who used to still use the Atari whilst using everything else for a while. So, but
the Atari is just for sequencing, right?
Yeah, just for sequencing, exactly. And that was my first thing into any kind of sort of electronic music. Really was using a friend of mine, actually. He's probably someone I should mention, who was in the background all the way along. Really, from sort of we were friends at school, and he then went on to the BBC after finishing university as a sound engineer, sort of electronic and sound engineer. He was busy sort of, mending stuff as well at one point, and doing stuff like sort of, servicing the SSL desks and doing all that kind of, more in that kind of electronic side. And then he gradually moved over more and more into the audio side, because that had always been a passion of his. And I think somewhere back, I do remember it somewhere back at school, like we were sort of messing around. He had a shed, which was fantastic, where he could mess around with the electronics. And, once we created out of a ZX Spectrum, a sampler, which was insane. He had got a program off, a magazine. It was all machine code and something, and they wrote in this thing, and somehow we, a bit of electronics as well, created an A to D and a D to A converter, and used the entire memory of the ZX Spectrum, which was only 128K, in very, very low quality sample rate. Like, you could sample something in and then hit the rubber keys on the Spectrum and play it back at different pitches. But considering a Fairlight sampler at the time cost you like the cost of a house, it was pretty exciting to be able to do that at all, even though it was extremely low quality. So, we were messing around with that kind of stuff. So it was.
I like to think about that moment when y'all finally got it to work. And you're like, haha, Fairlight.
Fairlight. Yeah, exactly.
I'm giddy just thinking about it. Like, that would have been so cool. I mean,
it was
at 3 a.m, you get it. You're like, hell yes. And
they had actually blown. Another friend was involved. They had actually blown all the ROM, EEPROM or whatever, in the computer once, and we'd had to replace it. So it wasn't without its problems, but like. So that was going on sort of, even, as I was getting into music and playing guitar, he was busy getting into electronics and doing that. And so later on, we were both sort of end of university kind of thing. We started messing around. He had a little sort of studio set up in his flat in London where he was working with the BBC during the day. And I used to come over and we used to hang out in the evenings. And basically we had the Atari set up, and this was probably first real sort of thing of sort of being in a studio kind of environment for me. He had DAT machines. He had much better gear than I had, and then had a few good effects units and lots of synths, the MC202 Roland. He had like an Oscar. He had a Kawai K1 and then a Roland. We both ended up with, I started getting some gear, but we both ended up with Roland JV1080s, and then Akai S. I think he had an S950 actually, the legendary S950, and I had the S3000 eventually. But so we were buying hardware basically, and all linked up with the Atari, and then all coming through a desk. I think we had Sec desk originally, which was a horrible desk, really, really horrible. Years later, it was mainly noise, but but it was it was a normal sort of 12 into 8 into 2 or 16 into 8 into 2, something like that. But so that was the beginning of it all, really, and trying to make sort of house music and trance and techno and electronic music really was the influence. Things like Kraftwerk and things like that influencing as well. I both think we liked Steve Reich and Michael Nyman and things that are sort of, slightly off the wall as well. But it was quite a creative time. This was sort of around the early 90s, I guess, that kind of era.
When you said Steve Reich, that popped my interest there. Different Trains.
Yeah, Different Trains.
Pat Metheny, or the guitar stuff was just insane, and that was all
insane.
tape.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it was that whole sort of timing thing, and like playing with time, and with like his sort of minimalism and that kind of sort of thing was really interesting. And then you could see Kraftwerk, and you could see other kind of like influences in electronic music, and like bands like the Orb were busy using some of those.
They sampled.
They did indeed. Yeah,
they did. Their Little Fluffy Clouds is
Little Fluffy Clouds.
Oh, that's really cool. And the funny thing was, I knew the Orb first, and then I was in a class in university, And they started playing this, and I'm going, man, this sounds really familiar somehow. And then they got to that one phrase, which was the sample in the
Yeah.
orb, and I'm like, everything I liked about that song was ripped off on somebody else.
Yeah. I found exactly the same experience. I was like, what, really? Yeah. But I mean, we do that, don't we? It's,
It
yeah,
is what it is.
we all sort of borrow, and things change when you borrow things, and they come out differently, and then somebody else borrows what you borrowed, and and it just goes on, and it is creativity. It's part of creativity to steal things, really.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
nice if you actually tell the person you've stolen them and pay them the copyright later, but
I think that was also in that era, pre-internet. I mean, I guess you could get on Gopher Pine or something like that, but
yeah.
pre-internet, and it was like, I mean, we would do sci-fi samples from movies that nobody, in our head, nobody had ever heard of.
No, no.
And then, and today it'd be like, hey, that's everybody knows everything, and it's all accessible, and you can't
Yeah.
hide from anything. So it
No.
was, but it wasn't. I think that's what it was with Alex Patterson, was probably like he heard it somewhere. I don't know the story. I'm making it up, and was like take a sample and go. Nobody that listens to my stuff is ever going to know where this came from.
No, sure, sure. Yeah. And there was a lot of that going on in the 90s. A lot of people putting records out with things that they kind of just didn't tell anyone were on there. And then people going like, hold on, that's the funky drummer loop. James Brown owns that. And,
Yeah,
James Brown owns that, but his drummer's not going to see a penny from it. But like, yeah. There was a lot of that sampling was just rife on everything. It was exciting though. I mean, I think it was good that I'd come up, learning on a sort of tape-based thing and doing things very organically. And then I got into the electronic side of things, which was totally different. And at the same time, I had bought a bit of gear, and I bought a Fostex R8 reel-to-reel. And so I was getting into using that. And I mean, that was a follow-on from the 4-track, really. But I was recording punk bands and stuff in my basement. I kind of got a basement studio in the house I was living in. That was probably my first proper studio space. And I sort of had one in a bedroom, but then I'd sort of moved off and got a whole sort of dedicated room. It wasn't great acoustically, but like it was quiet. You didn't get any noise from other people. And I sort of had a very rudimentary, trying to remember who made it, Cheetah or something. It's a terrible electronic drum pads, but they were just like no bounce on them at all. They were just like hitting something very solid, and but it was just like pads but I could put them into my Akai D16 or whatever it was, and you could trigger sounds and record drum sounds, so it didn't have to be electronic. I did a lot of stuff which was sort of like trying to sound like a live kit from that, just with samples, and then I would track things like guitars and bass and vocals onto the R8, and I had it all synced up with my sequencer. I'd stripe the tape on one thing of the tape with SMPTE, and then convert that to MIDI timecode and shove that into the computer. It would follow along, and so you'd have like all your sequencing stuff running with your tape. That was the plan. So it gave me more tracks to play with. And then, when you came to sort of mix down, you'd mix it all down through the desk and just go straight to 2-track, really. So that was a sort of bit of a hybrid sort of system of electronic stuff and like analog, really, which I was getting into, which wasn't the easiest to work with a lot of the time.
No. But I like thinking about you and tracking and doing the chasing time code and stuff, and then in my head thinking, you know what? He didn't count to 30. He counted to 25. There's 5 frames a second over there.
Yeah,
So
indeed.
that was a whole different experience.
Yeah.
And how much fun would that be?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had
all
some
of-
nightmares with NTSC PAL conversions and all sorts. Now it's the things are smart enough to do it for you, but back then it was.
Well, and
Yeah.
one thing I don't think you guys over there ever had to deal with was pull up and pull down, or maybe you did. But I know over here we have a thing called pull up, pull down, which was it wasn't 30. I mean, you probably know all this, but it was because it used to be 30 when it was black and white. NTSC introduced color, and
yeah.
then it was 29.97, which
Yeah.
now you have this point, I don't know, whatever percentage of up and down cross whatever, especially whenever you go into straight 24 film and
Yeah.
back and the 3.2 pull down, all these things.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
for you guys, oh, y'all would have a pull up. Yeah, that's right. Because if you did film for your television, you went from 24 frames to just
25.
25. So everything was a little faster,
Yeah.
or the other way around, a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, there's, of course, we've still got the enduring 48, 44.1 battle, which goes on, and and I mean, obviously we've got people, recording at 192 and all kinds of things, but not me. I have to say, not me. I'm about music, so I sort of stuck at 44.1, and that's pretty much what I stay at. I'll change to 48.
Will you track in 44.1?
Yeah, 44.1. Yeah,
that's actually,
yeah.
I can respect that. I heard lots of arguments back and forth, like, well, you do 48 and whatever. But if you're ending up in 44.1, why not just stay there? That does remind me of a story. I used to work for television, not the BBC, but PBS over here. It's where it's kind of the same, except we beg for money. And we have a television show called Austin City Limits. And so John Mayer came on to play. And he was like, all right, I would like to record the audio at 192 kilohertz. We're like, I don't know where you think you are.
You're like, I can put 4 mics out.
But we've got lots of microphones, and this system is set up for 48K. So
yeah. Bad luck. Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny one though. I mean, I think, it's a luxury, isn't it? And I guess I get that point that if you can record everything in the highest fidelity and then you knock it down at the end, why not? But I guess it was partly like how much you could get out of your machines, and not overtaxing them, how big your file sizes are, all sorts of things that kind of weigh into it. And now, of course, our machines are so much more powerful, hard drives are so much cheaper, that kind of thing. I do always recording, a lot on 32-bit float now, but I would, for a long time, it was 24-bit as well. So, I don't really think it particularly matters. 24-bit, 44.1 or above is fine for me. But yeah, but obviously back then, digital was, there was 12-bit around and there was 16-bit, and, early years of digital were quite variable as, the A to D converters and stuff. There was a big difference between gear and how well it sounded. And, I used ADATs for a few years as well. After my tape machine, that was the next thing, was ADATs.
He's falling in love with you now.
You like the ADAT revolution. Yeah, that was...
It was the thing that brought home recording studios to life. I think that it was
definitely
the landslide of, did you need 16 tracks? Oh, you need 24. You need 64 tracks. Well, just buy 8 of our machines. Link them together, and
as long as the transports don't go wrong is great. But
right, getting 8 machines to lock up in less than 30 seconds, forget it.
No, it's pretty. They're amazing machines, really, and obviously, Alanis Morissette, all kinds of people were busy using them. Sort of there were a lot of records that were made, pretty big records on them. So
I remember the Alanis Morissette thing, and I remember reading about it and looking at it. And finally, years later, here on YouTube, I look it up. And in my head, I had 2 ADAT machines, and so I could do 16 tracks. And I was thinking, well, Alanis, I'm listening to her tracks back. She probably only used 2 machines. We're the same. And then I see the track sheets, and it's like she had 5 machines going at once. And I'm like,
just one track for the cowbell, not the, and every drum on a different track.
And I don't remember where I read this, but I heard somewhere that those might have been the machines that were doing the tracking, but the A to D converters weren't the built-in A to D converters.
Weren't the built-in ones?
Yeah,
No.
they had
Yeah.
other A to D converters. Okay, it's feeling a little unfair now. Maybe she had nicer microphones, preamps, A to D converters, and the zeros and ones were the same.
Yeah.
My how I store
Yeah.
my zeros and ones.
Yeah. Well, I sort of was moving from the R8 kind of days where like in the basement there was like what I called that studio Off the Wall Studios. That was the beginning of me running a studio, and then I moved out of that eventually and got Opus Studios. Opus Studios started around 2000 when I got an old coach house and converted it and into a full studio. So I had like live room downstairs and a control room upstairs and booth and everything else. And it was a massive project. It was just like crazy. I didn't really realize what I was doing. I was just like bought this building and and I remember talking to the acoustics guy. I luckily did actually get an acoustics
Had an
guy,
acoustics guy.
yeah,
Well
I
done.
did. Yeah,
Well,
yeah. A lot of people don't go anywhere near one of them, do they?
how much money did he make you spend?
Well, that was the amazing thing. I tried lots of different acoustics guys, and a lot of them were just like, yeah, well, here's the budget. And it was just getting crazy before it even started. And I remember this guy, he'd done quite a lot of good stuff, actually. Done some stuff at Leeds College of Music, had done some big sort of things that he'd done. But like, he was just prepared to go, right, you basically don't have any money and you can like you want to do this, but all you want to do it with is just what you can find, like, you know, in your local hardware store or whatever, builders merchants, and you know, you're just going to do this as you go. And I said, yeah, me and a couple of mates, we're just going to build this, and like, that is it. I don't have funds to do this really. And you know, I mean, I remember he not very legal, I shouldn't think, but like he was just like, yeah, okay, so I'll give me a whole load of advice and some drawings, and he'd work stuff out and tell me what things to buy and whatever. And then he'd go like, yeah, so just 300 quid for that advice. And I was like, okay. And he said, I just put it in a jiffy bag, just like one of those kind of envelopes, and just send it in the post. So I just like mail this out to someone. So I'm pretty sure he wasn't being completely straight about the money he received. But like, yeah, so but he was just very sort of willing to like help someone who, you know, with his knowledge, which was really good, but like on the side really of his main business. So yeah, I was lucky because I got some good advice, I think, which would have probably been even more expensive. So
Well,
yeah, but
I'm sure you're not the first person he's run into who is like, all right, I have zero money.
no, exactly.
How do we do this with nothing but make it sound amazing? And
Egg crates.
you run into things like, you know what? If you have somebody shows up with a nice new car, and new cars, you were talking about recording in a car before, but newer cars, they spend a lot of money to try and keep the road noise out of the car, which means the inside of the car sounds pretty darn good. Like as an ISO booth. So did you do some voiceover work? Cars are not a bad place to do it.
No, that's true. Yeah. It was a good building because it was like, it was detached. So it wasn't attached to anything else. Good amount of gap between me and my neighbors and everything else. And yeah, I mean, there were bits, it was just like 9 months of like, I thought it was going to be about 6 weeks in my ignorance. I was like, oh, it won't take long to put together, bung all the gear in and put up some rock wool on the walls. And there we go. And it was like 9 months later of like, you know, heavy building work. Because everything is, you know, everything when it comes to acoustics that's any good is heavy, pretty much. So it was just.
So you built your own panels, and he just said, put one here, put one there.
Exactly.
And, you know, that's going to be a bass nightmare. So you need a trap or whatever.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing was we had to try and isolate the live room, which was downstairs, from the control room upstairs. And so I wanted as good isolation as we could get in the floor and the room. So we sort of tried to sort of float the room a little bit downstairs, and then tried to sort of pack the joist between the two as heavily as possible. And it worked pretty well. You could tell there was a drummer downstairs, but he did sound like he was a long way away, just sort of, you know, just a bit of, and as soon as you turned on your mics, you weren't listening to that. You were listening to it in the control room, because that's the thing. You can't record a good sound if you can just hear it coming through the wall. So, you know, or the floor. So Yeah, it was good. It worked really well, and we could make as much noise as we wanted upstairs. They didn't get pick up in the mics in the control room, and vice versa. You didn't get any of that. So that was it was a good live room. In fact, the live room you could have full on rehearsals and things like as a band as well, and didn't bother our neighbours. I remember, you could be rocking away at 2 a.m. without bothering them. So that was good.
You're reminding me. I'm looking at where the space that you're in right now, which looks like you're maybe upstairs, and you've
Indeed.
got the ceiling
Yep.
doing this number.
Yep.
About the time I graduated high school ish, my dad built a garage in his backyard, and it had a space above it, and I was like, "Whoa, you know what that could be? That could be, because we were building it from scratch. Like that could be an amazing studio, and
Amazing studio. Yeah.
yeah, let's do that." And so, of course, I'm doing things in my head, and I don't have any money, but Dad did, and so and then finally I'm like, "Dad, oh man, and we're gonna do some isolated whatever and all this stuff," and he's like, that whole thing is 5 feet from the neighbors, and I am not about to put 100 decibels of loud 5 feet from my neighbors. No, you're not
Yeah.
doing a studio there. Not at
No.
all. So yeah,
I worked once I set up Opus Studios. Like I was busy going with like engineering sound all the time, like bands coming in and out, recording all kinds of different people. It was just like it was pretty non-stop actually. It was really, really long hours a lot of the time, and I loved it. But like I worked for a client. I was producing his. I guess it was an EP really. I think we did 3 tracks in total, something like that. But like he had a good connection with Genesis, with the guy who was running the studio for Genesis. So Genesis had a studio not very far away from where my studio was, in this place called Chiddingfold, called The Farm. And it was an old dairy farm that I think they bought. And that they were there. I think a lot of their albums from sort of, guess it might have been bought at the end of the 80s. Maybe it was beginning of the 90s. But like,
the best.
yeah,
One.
so yeah. And he said, "Oh yeah, Jeff, who works down there, said we could use the studio one weekend." And I was like, "What?" Like, so I had to go and meet Jeff and talk it all through and all the rest of it. And yeah, we got a recorded Genesis studio for a few days. Yeah, which was pretty amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
What
that was fantastic.
that like?
Yeah, that was incredible. It was really incredible. I mean, I think it was like huge SSL desk in the main room, and then some lovely isolated booths for the drums, and a great room for tracking acoustics and vocals and other things. But it's funny you talk about the kind of near your neighbours and sort of isolating it and all the rest of it. Where they built it was just. There's a sort of fairly small aerodrome called Dunsfold Aerodrome, which is near it. It's not in use now as an aerodrome, but it was then. And so they had to kind of figure out a way. The first thing that they had to figure out, apparently Genesis all found this place. All of the guys have found this, or their manager have found it, something like that. And they came round, and I think it was for sale, and the people were saying like, "Oh, look at the farmhouse. It's beautiful. And it's all got all these old things." And all they did was sit in the cowshed, and they couldn't understand why the entire band were in the cowshed and completely uninterested in the house. Of course, they weren't thinking about the house. They were decided the cowshed was definitely going to be the studio, and they were thinking all about the studio. So they bought the place and didn't really care about the house, and converted this cowshed into an incredible studio. But yeah, I think they had to spend over, I mean, this would have been a lot at the time, over 3 million, just like on the acoustics, just to try and stop any sound. And I remember when I was in there the first day, I looked in the plane, you could see the plane fly over you. It was quite really low. And I just had this weird thing of like, I can't hear that plane. That plane is literally, it's like I'm in the flight path. It's coming off the end of the runway and gone over the top of us. and I couldn't hear it. Didn't know it was there, and that was how good the acoustics were in that way. So they were phenomenal, and
I would
sound.
be so interested to know what they did to make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. What did they do? Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of walls within walls and like, sort of, so done the proper way where you've got complete sort of isolation from the outer skin to the inner skin structurally as well. And probably floating everything as you go. So it was, yeah, beautiful studio, beautiful place to work. And yeah, you just catch yourself in the middle of being in there to going like, Phil Collins was probably playing the drums in there before my drummer was in there and all the rest of it. So, and I remember being left in charge of the SSL like by Jeff, and I'd only been working on this for a while. I was tracking into my computer directly, and so I was familiar with the software that I was using because I was using mine. But like I was coming out of their desk and their A to D converters into my machine, and just he was just like, yeah, well, I think you've got this, haven't you? And just walked off. And I was like, I'm in charge of this enormous SSL, which I don't know what I'm doing with. I felt very like, oh my God, like I don't have this. But yeah, I did. It was all right. But, in many ways, they're all the same thing. So,
I did look up the farm, and that was Jeff spelled,
yeah.
very British to me, Geoff.
That's right. Yeah.
I would say Callingham, but Callingham.
Yeah.
Jeff Callingham. It says longtime Genesis technician Jeff Callingham.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Called the intense building work and and all this stuff. But sadly, it said that that thing's no longer there.
No, it is no longer there. The farm, which is terrible. Yeah, very sad. But there's true of a lot of studios. Like sort of, I've been in like that are no longer there. Nomis, which was a big studio in London, and like I remember being in there, and then and then sort of a few years later, I heard that was it. That's gone. A lot of these big residential studios, just like with everything changing, they wouldn't stay there. I mean, Abbey Road, which I've been to, fortunately, Abbey Road is still there, and I believe. Sort of Peter Gabriel's studio, which I've been to as well. That's still there. So,
that's pretty great.
Real World, yeah, that's an amazing place. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you find it as well. Like studios, I mean, the States has got a lot of great studios. So
because I can't name any.
Well, there's some historical stuff, but most of it, L.A. or New York, and then occasionally you get I forgot what the place that Rush did all their stuff out in the Canadian woods.
Yeah.
Was it the Chateau or I don't know, some French name? I think they're famous in the sense of what was done there more so than maybe their tech. Or that. Yeah. But the farm, that's just an interesting story of building the building inside the building and
yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes you wonder, does Abbey Road, do they owe Beatles money for still existing?
I think that's a mutually beneficial dynamic. But don't ever try to drive down that road because you'll have idiots in the crosswalk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a very British institution, Abbey Road. It's a strange place, really. It's sort of like it's I've moved a bit with the times, but like in many ways, it's just like very odd place. Very odd that it's managed to be sort of so, hugely successful and sort of like it's made itself a brand though, really as well. I think that's the thing that it's done. Abbey Road, like you get Abbey Road plugins, you get Abbey Road this, you get Abbey. It's all in all of our psyches. And the Beatles, huge amount of why that's worked, I guess. So
Jeff Callingham. Is he still around? Do you know?
I don't know, actually. I'll really be honest, I couldn't tell you. Yeah.
You should send him a belated Christmas card.
Yeah, I should. Yeah. I don't know if he'll remember me, but it was great. It was great fun time. So
all right. So I know you told us that, but how exactly did you get? What was the relation again? Just one more
Well,
time.
it was one of my clients was a
Okay.
good friend of
Okay.
Jeff, you know,
All
yeah,
right.
the family or something like that, you know, outside of music, you know. And so he just said, "Oh yeah, if we need to do this, we're going to track all this stuff for his album." So I was his EP rather, this chap I was working for, and Andrew. He said like, "Oh, well, I'll ask Jeff if we can use." And I was like, when he said that, I was, people say this a lot. Oh, I'll just, you know, pull in this favor. And I go, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever. And I don't expect it to happen. And then he was like, yeah, we can go and use Genesis Studio for 2 days. And I was like, what? Yeah. So that was pretty mad. Yeah.
That's
That's pretty
fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
I do enjoy a Phil Collins and a Genesis song. Those
Yeah, absolutely.
those are some
Yeah.
bangers.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and those sort of things would happen at times. Just sort of surprise sort of things would happen, like whilst doing the studio, like sort of various sort of famous people or semi-famous people would appear, and this, that, and the other. But I always describe my days of running the studio as not being full of that, and I don't think it's why you should ever go into it. I think it's just about a lot of it about people who are just passionate about making music, wanting to record music. And a lot of them, you know, a lot of work comes from local musicians and actually connecting with, getting really good connections within your local sort of sphere. I mean, I guess you always hope that the new Coldplay or whatever are going to walk in, but it isn't the norm for a lot of us. I don't think that happens. You know, I think.
So what happened to the studio that you built in the coach house?
It's still there, yeah, and still a studio, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's just not yours.
Not mine now. No,
Okay.
I sold it in 2018, I think. Yeah, around that kind of time. It could have been 2016. Time is eluding me. Yeah, but we decided to make a move, which we've down where we are now. We're down to the coast. We moved from sort of near London way down to the coast, and yeah, it was just a sort of lifestyle change, really, sort of change of pace. And I've gone now, sort of got the studio that I've got here, so like, which is more sort of, I'm based at home really, and based in, as you say, the top floor of our house, really. So, but this is a great space for like writing, recording, great space for mixing and mastering, and you know, that's what I do an awful lot of. And obviously things have changed so much with how much we're living online and how much people sort of sending files to you and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, the world wasn't working quite that way when I started in 2000, you know, with the larger studio. But yeah, so it was a bit of a change, but I sold it to another guy who's really doing exactly the same as I was doing back then. So he's kind of kept it going, which is lovely. I was really
So where was
pleased.
that located?
It's a little place called Greyshot, which is just a little village outside of, well, the nearest town is sort of Guildford, really, which is just south of London. Yeah, so
But
Oak Studios.
you're in Watch It or Watch It.
I am in Watch It. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
The only reason
Yeah.
I know that is because Facebook, and also I found your YouTube, and
Yeah.
there's a little tour. I guess you're in the back of a Jeep, and
Oh yeah.
that is a
An
video
American Jeep. Yeah, yeah.
of your music playing, which is
Yeah.
very reminiscent to me of kind of Roy Orbison, which I've been on a Roy Orbison kick lately, and I just
Oh right.
yeah, it was kind of nice.
Yeah. If you want to see the music that I make these days, it's Aisle 9 is where my music gets made, and an awful lot of what I've been making over the last, I started releasing as an artist in about 2021, I guess. And Aisle 9 is synthwave, really. That is what the genre that I mainly work in would be called, but it's quite a broad genre, and there's like everything from sort of retro pop styled stuff to like, cyberpunk within it, so it can be quite wide, synth wave and synth pop. But like that's definitely what I've been doing as a musician and an artist, and releasing again, which was probably my whole thing of getting into music was, I wanted to release my own stuff and make my own stuff. But of course, we live in a world now where you can do that.
So is Aisle 9, is that going to be a different YouTube channel? Because I found your personal one.
Yeah. R9
Okay.
Music. Yeah, if you're on YouTube, R9 Music is me. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, we'd obviously be able to find that on Spotify.
Yeah, you will in Spotify. Yeah, I've been doing a lot over the last few years, and it's been an incredible thing to. I mean, Mark Matthews is who I talked about, who was our connection. He does a lot as well in that line and in that world. It's a niche genre, but like a lot of niche genres, the benefit of working in a niche genre is you get to know everyone. Everyone knows each other, and you can start to sort of, I don't know, find some sense of community within it, which I think is difficult when you're a singer-songwriter, and there are billions of singer-songwriters. So how do you promote yourself? How do you get anywhere as a musician and an artist? It can be hard. Whereas if you choose a smaller part of the music spectrum, it can be easier in that way to at least become something within it, and to make connections with it and in it, and sort of build a bit more of sort of a profile really within that. I think it's hard for a lot of musicians. I know a lot of people I work with say, "Oh, I've just written a song and here it is," and they don't really have much identity as to who they are or what they fit into. And then they go, "Well, how do I promote this?" And I'm going to put it on Spotify and everything else. But it's like, well, everyone does that. You've got to come up with something else, and and
Yeah, it's
connect it with something. Yeah,
it is way more than just the creation of the song or the music or the album
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
You can do that, but if you don't have the other stuff, then you might as well have not done it. Well, to a point, right? So
yeah,
there's a bunch of music I've recorded for me, and I'm the only one who listens to it, and nobody else
yeah,
gets to hear it, but it
yeah,
makes me happy. So doing the
yeah.
exercise is not worthless. But I will say,
No, of course not.
as
Yeah.
far as going back to the synthwave that you're creating, that really, for Mike and I think I speak for both of us being Gen Xers, it really does kind of
Mm.
tap into that childhood vein of nostalgia.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I mean, it really does kind of, you know, hit the right spot.
Yeah, yeah,
Enjoy it.
yeah. Yeah, I think I've sort of a bit of music wise, I find myself quite torn between. There's a part of me that's, I don't know, there's always going to be like sort of dreaming of, stadiums of rock music and like, and country. Like I like some country rock. I love like a lot of the kind of old 70s. I'm somewhere from 67 to 72. I think I love a lot of the music that was created then, from sort of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and like all of those kind of things. I love lots of harmonies and all of that, very organic stuff, like a lot of it. And I love a lot of that. And there's another side of me that's kind of got the electronic bug and the dance music bug, and I think both sides of them have coexisted and gone along all the way through my interest in music. And this, if you look to my record collection, that holds true, and it holds true for the music I'm actually making today. Really, I sort of work with some people who are very into that. They might be into Americana, or they might be into like sort of 70s sort of sounds and Beatles and all kinds of that sort of thing, psychedelic stuff. And then on the other hand, I'm really into the sort of synth pop and synth wave kind of thing, which is made a lot of the time sort of in a DAW with no acoustic instruments involved. So yeah, I like both, and they can seem at odds with each other, but I don't know if they are. They're just different sides of me, perhaps.
I feel like the when they seem at odds, I think that has to do with what I've found is it's the influence of my friends, right? So when I go tell somebody, "Oh man, I really like this genre or this from this genre," and they're like, "What the problem with that is there's no real drummers that's just all machines.
Yeah.
You don't want those machines to, we've all seen Terminator. Don't let them take over, like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like Phil Collins, like a brilliant drummer who's played drums on so many things, and he's amazing feel, an amazing drummer. Sad that he can't play now, really, but like, incredible. Like, and then he wrote "In the Air Tonight" essentially around a drum machine. So, I mean, he obviously can tell the benefit of the two, the two sides, and like that but at the heart of it was a song. At the heart of it was what he wanted to say. So, I think that's true in general. I don't really mind if you're using a computer and it's working, or you're using a DAW or a synth or whatever. Doesn't matter to me. But then I do love that thing that happens. It is something that I can't deny, like, which I don't get so much when I'm writing on my own, and like, or even collaborating with people. I do quite a lot of collaboration with other artists, but it is different when you're in the DAW and you're in this kind of virtual world than when you're just in a room with a load of guys and or girls as well. But like when you're in just a group of people in a room making music, and you get in the vibe, and that is a different thing.
Jam session.
Yeah. Jam session, exactly.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that before, Mike and I, about the whole sort of being in engineer mode or being in creative mode, and that trying to be in both at the same time is impossible. For me, I find it impossible. It's a gear switch that sometimes you can't get back into creative when you're like, oh, I need to fix this thing with the microphone and go do blah, blah, blah. And then you come back and you're like, where was I? Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of gears, I'd like to switch it for a second.
Sure.
Back when you had the Atari, what I really want to know is, what was your first synth? What gear were you plugging that into?
What was my first synth? That's a really good question. In fact, what was my first synth that I ever bought? Because I used other people's, but what was the first one that I ever had? I had a Novation Bass Station, or Deep Bass 9, which just like, they're kind of like Chibi 303, kind of like clones, really.
Yep. But
I don't know if those were the very first one, or the very first one I had was the Roland JV 1080. They were sort of around the same time. Those were really, it might have been the 1080 that came before that. It was one or the other. But yeah, because one was very simple and analog. The Novation Bass Station was just an analog thing, purely analog. And obviously the JV 1080 was a sound module and was all digital, as it were, just sort of waveforms, and lots of banks of instruments, but could do multi-timbral and sort of do. I think the JV 1080 was probably the first actual synth that I bought, which was an expensive synth to buy. It cost me a fortune at the time, but like, but
probably cost you a fortune now.
Yeah, probably it probably would do. Yeah, but it was just great because it had 16 sort of, I think it was 16 sort of timbral, or was it 32? And it had like, a really big polyphony as well, wasn't it? So 64, 128, something like that. So yeah, it was just great. You could write a whole piece of music essentially and do all the different parts just from that sound module. That was the idea.
Roland made kind of sound modules to be sort of like here's a workstation for you.
Yeah.
Create all the things.
Yeah, it was very much that, a workstation. It was just the sound module part rather than all the keyboard part. So it wasn't, but it was great. I think the downside of it was very much that editing wise and everything else, well, it wasn't easy. If you just wanted to automate the filter on it, it was just like a nightmare, whereas you would just go now, with a VST, and it's so simple to sort of write in some filter automation and, change, open up your filter or whatever, like during a track. But like, it was very difficult to do even the most basic things on it. Whereas but it sounded great out of the box. You just went like, right, I want a Hammond sound. Right, there we go. There's a electric piano. There's a bass sound that sounds pretty usable, you know. And for those times, I think it produced really usable sounds quickly. So it was,
Yeah, that era of Roland sounds. I have a JD 990.
yeah,
They were just, to me, if somebody could play anything, and I'm like, that's a Roland.
Yeah.
I don't
yeah,
know what it was, and I mean, it could be a piano, it could be a synth, bass, whatever.
mm,
It just had this quality to it, and it was clean, and they were responsive and great.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just looked it up. That thing was 64 voice polyphony,
That's right. Yeah,
16-part multi-timbral.
yeah, yeah.
That
That
was
makes sense.
insane. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So it was a hell of a lot of synth for its time, and you know would enable you to write a whole piece of music. So it was a good purchase from that point of view. I have to say, years later, years later in the studio, like when I was just mainly all I did day in day out was like live bands so much, and I didn't use synth sounds and much. But if I did, I was starting to get VSTs on the computer, so I'd go like, oh right, well here's a you know Native Instruments B4 or whatever it would be. I'd just grab a VST quickly if we needed something, and someone would play that through. And you know, I had a nice grand piano, or you know, from Steinberg's Grand or whatever. Like you know, there were always stuff to like you know at your fingertips, and now I mean even more so. But I started to realize that I didn't turn the JV 1080 on and use it for like anything like that. All I did was I used it for a click for years. So it was the most expensive click track ever. It sat on one program and it did. I loved the click. I got a nice sort of block sound or whatever, and like you know, side
I know
stick
what
or
you're talking about.
something.
It's on the
And that was
percussion
it.
kit. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And it was just great. It was just like that's the click I want, and
The
like
best
we had
wood
it for
block ever.
years. Yeah, wood block. Yeah, yeah. So that was just my click for like about 15 years, I think. Yeah.
Do you still have the 1080 or no?
No, I don't actually. I did actually sell it, but sadly it returned because it was faulty, and
Oh,
I was like, oh no. So it sat around for a while, and I think eventually I gave it to someone who felt like they might be happy to try and make it behave itself, but
the
I
guy
don't
you
think.
sell it to said this only makes a woodblock noise.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This makes a really good wood block, but yeah, no, what a shame because you know, I mean, you get attached to these things, you know, you do. So,
You do.
yeah, weird, isn't it?
Are you all VSTs now? Are you completely in the box, or do you have any off-board synth gear?
No, I am completely in the box. Have been completely in the box for a number of years now. Probably about probably 6 years, I would say something like that. 7 years, it's growing. Yeah, I say in the box. I'm a guitarist, so there's always stuff going on with guitars and basses and that sort of thing sometimes, which are not in the box. And I do have a little rolling kit here, so I can hook that up. But I don't tend to use the sounds off it. I tend to use the sounds off Cubase, but like or battery or something else. But like yeah, I'm really VST and plug-in bass these days, and you know, Apollo Twin. Like so many people have gone down a similar path. I feel like producers, you know, in that way. But I have to admit, more recently, I have felt a bit of a sort of urge to get like maybe a synth again. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
I
it
heard a
might
little
happen.
almost disappointment in your recollection there, going,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I
there's
mean,
some cool stuff out and
yeah,
coming out that it's not pricey.
no,
Uh, yeah, Behringer's coming out with a one
mm,
in a couple months, the Pharaoh, which I'm kind of interested in. But then they also have a slew of their mini synths. They're $100, and you're just going, okay, cool. And they all have MIDI and they all have USB, and so it's almost like, hey, I need a new sound for this. It's almost worth it. And then if you
yeah,
ever do a live gig, you can control that or do this. I don't know. That's kind
mm,
of my thing. I, I don't want to say I have a fear of going all in the box. It's very convenient. It's what I always really wanted kind of growing up, going, I wish I could just take my laptop somewhere and be done. And I had this thing in my head where everything would be virtualized perfectly. And then now that it's almost that way, I'm almost reluctant to do it
Yeah.
And I'm going, okay. And then there's also the, I don't know what to call it. Maybe the snob in me that's going, I hate the fact that somebody else can have a Prophet 5 and they didn't hunt it down and restore it and, pay for that and all this crap. They just paid $50 online and they have a Prophet 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's all too easy, isn't it, really?
And damn,
Yeah.
damn other people's luck.
Yeah.
Well, because I
Yeah.
had I had some analog synths and it was they all had a unique story about how did you find that?
Yeah.
Where did you get? Oh my gosh, this and that. And then I sold a bunch of them, which I regret now.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah. I had
So
a
I want to go back to the Behringer stuff
mm,
because I went down this rabbit hole and I find it very interesting. So evidently they made or they have made and released something called the LM drum, which is like the Lindrum, uh,
yeah.
almost
Rogers.
exactly, right? Except here's the fun thing. You can also find this stuff on the internet that the dude who made the original Lindrum
Roger.
talks about the Behringer LM drum, and it is not favorable. I mean, the sounds are there and all that stuff, but like, evidently, this dude could sue anybody he wanted to that has ripped him off over the years. But he's just like, man, what's the point? Life,
I
Yeah.
saw that, and he was like, I doubt they're making any money off this anyway. So
yeah,
he's like, okay, but he goes, that's weird. They ripped off it looks like it. It has these things, but he's like, I don't know who the hell would buy this.
I'd do it.
Yeah, I mean, they've done fantastically well, haven't they, with Behringer
Yeah.
gear over the years? I mean, it's like Behringer has been a company that I think, went from like I had a headphone amp that was Behringer for years and years and years. I had like all kinds of DI boxes and all kinds of things in the studio.
And I guess what happened to your headphone amp? Did
Well,
did the
yeah.
plastic around the power button pop out?
No, actually,
Headphone amp stop working?
I literally found it smoking one day. It like literally started smoking. So, but classically enough,
You can't let
what
the
did I
smoke
do? When it started smoking and basically died, I took it out. I chucked it in the bin. I bought another Behringer headphone amp and used that because, like, it worked. It worked really, really well. It had phenomenal sort of like, it had every kind of input and output that I could want, all kind of sort of control. Like you could put a sort of an input into the front and blend between the aux input that you're putting in the front and the mix that was going out the back. All kinds of great things. So it just enabled me to give separate mixes to all my musicians really easily, really cheaply, and cost, I don't know, 120 quid or something. It was really inexpensive. So yeah, when it broke, I just bought another one because I wasn't going to pay £300 for something else that didn't do as much. So it was just the way it went. But like their gear was a bit flaky, did break a lot. I mean, loads of Behringer DI boxes that just annihilated themselves at various points. So, but then the XR stuff, like their digital desks, we used it in our band because I did a band for like about 18 years, something like that, like a function band that we were out every weekend playing and performing. And
how did it do in live performance spaces?
well, it's great. The XR digital desk was absolutely incredible. And I mean, it's just phenomenal desk that you could sort of get this thing that I mean, you either have it as a rack unit or as a sort of
Sure.
X18 I've got, which sort of looks a bit like a desk but has got a hole where you put an iPad in the middle to control it, because you don't have any control on the thing. It's just like just inputs and outputs on it. And then you sort of hook up your app and you get into it. But then suddenly you've got like this insane piece of equipment where you've got 18 ins and outs on USB audio, which work at a frighteningly low latency as well, probably better than my UAD audio thing. The latency is incredible on it. And you can have 18 different inputs as well into it, and you've got compressors and EQs and everything on every single channel. You can save it all. You can do separate headphone outputs to 6 musicians. You can all of this,
Wow.
and all of this for what was a few £100. I don't know. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's Behringer, so there's bound to be something flaky and weird about it. And the software was pretty buggy. The internal router on the thing is shite. But so there's all kinds of stuff that's not quite right. But you do sit down there sometimes and think, this is crazy. I've got the whole band. I've, connected you all up. We're all on a stage. We've got beautiful sound out front with control of gating and EQ and compression on every channel. We've got like nice reverbs on the vocals. We've got all of this, all from this app and this desk. And then we've all got separate control on our sort of iPads of our own monitor mixes and all of this. And you know what? I'm feeding it to a computer and recording it all with 18 tracks coming out into there, and it's not messing up at all, and it works. And I mean, I spent, I don't know, £500 on it, whatever it was, but so it's an incredible piece of technology.
So you're taking this thing out. Y'all are live gigging with it. How long did y'all do that, and did it continue to function the entire time?
Yeah, still functioning. I've still got it. Yeah, I used it for.
You sound disappointed.
Yeah, yeah. Couldn't buy something better. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, it's still going. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we cottoned onto that. Only that technology arrived somewhere in the latter years of us doing our band. Actually, we probably had it for, I don't know, 6 years or something like that. And before that, we just had an analog desk, a sort of Yamaha desk, which, I mean, I love analog desks like that. They just, oh, that channel's broken, we'll plug into this channel. It's very sort of straightforward and you never get confused. I think that's the thing that I do hate with digital and live is like, well, there's something coming through. Where's it coming through? Scroll through,
What bank?
Yeah, exactly.
What page?
All of that.
Where's the menu?
Yeah. Something's broken. Oh, something's not working. It can be so difficult to find what isn't working, why it isn't working. Whereas analog is so much simpler like that. I mean, when I was in the studio, I had analog desk and I had a Soundcraft Ghost desk, a 30. Well, I started off with 24 and then went to a 32 channel, 32 into 8 into 2. And, phenomenal piece of gear, just absolutely superb. I mean, yeah, there are better preamps in the world. There are better EQs. I mean, but you'd have to be going up towards, I mean, Alan and Heath stuff, some of that was pretty good. Audience stuff is pretty good, but then you'd be probably going up into,
SSL.
Neve and SSL territory. So you were, I mean, Mackie did a pretty excellent desk as well that a lot of people would use. So, I think the Mackie and the Soundcraft were definitely up there as very good desks for that kind of setup. But yeah, phenomenal. Loved it. And I do miss that. I do miss it. It's a lovely thing, the analog feel when you're an engineer of just pulling up channels and putting stuff into it and mixing on it. I did enjoy it.
I will say the first album that I recorded on was through a Soundcraft studio. 24 by 8 by 2. And it was like every channel was proper in that it had tape returns and you could flop,
Yeah.
And, that with some ADATs, and I totally understood. We're like, hey, how do you like the British EQ? And I was like, I love it.
yeah, it was good. It was good. They did have that British EQ, and the EQ sort of from the I know the Soundcraft Studio, and then up to the Ghost was a real step up even from that, and the preamps even so. But really, really great piece of equipment. So and amazing as well with that kind of gear, how well it lasts and how well it holds value. I mean, because it lost value hugely from obviously when these desks were made and they went onto the second-hand market. But then if you bought it's like second-hand cars a little bit, but like you buy a desk for £1,500 second-hand, which was probably 5 or 6 like new, But then when you sold it 15 years later, it was still worth £1,500. So you hadn't lost anything on like owning this thing and using it for like
Right.
years and years, as long as it was in good condition. So yeah.
There's and nowadays that's a little different, but microphones tend to hold their value
Yeah.
and lenses for cameras tend to hold their value. But speaking of microphones, what are you talking through right there?
Well, hold on. I was going to say that. I was like, Mike, here's your test. Tell me what that mic is.
It looks Neumann-y, but the thing that's holding it doesn't look Neumann-y unless I.
No.
So it's not Neumann.
It is Neumann.
It is.
It is.
Oh.
Yeah. It is a Neumann TLM 103.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I'm on a 103.
Yeah, I thought that as well.
Where's your? I haven't seen that shot.
No, because
That's not
no, that's not a Neumann shock mount.
Okay.
No, the Neumann shock mount disintegrated one day a very long time ago. I remember dropping it and it just breaking.
Yeah,
and I was like,
well,
that was an expensive shock mount. God,
$300.
So yeah, brilliant mic, but the shock mount I wasn't impressed with what happened. Yeah. So this is just like some cheap like thing I think that I probably got off eBay, but like the only other one I found that's really quite good for it are the ones for the 414, the AKG 414. They because AKG makes some really good ones, and those actually work on the TLM as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if they've made different versions of it, but I think they have. But this, in the sense of, like a lot of things, when they first make something, the quality of them is really good, and they put all the research and development in. Like my Mackie HR824s, which I'm looking at the moment, which the original ones, which I've got, I think are absolutely phenomenal monitors. Sure. And I know, like Peter Gabriel had them in his writing studio. I know, because I went to Peter Gabriel's studio and he had them in there. So I mean, they're phenomenal, and lots of places had them, but. Then now the HR824 Mark IIs, which came out, which are all made in China, I mean, they work. They just don't sound as good. I'm sorry, they just don't. So, it is this sort of thing of getting a brand, getting it up there, getting a model that somebody knows, and then going, how can we make this cheaper and make more money off it? And it does happen quite a lot in the audio industry. So, and I don't know if that happened with the TLM because, I'd like to think that Neumann have just kept making it the same way. But this is a very early one of theirs that I picked up when I started the studio. And I remember like having this horrible decision between, I was getting it secondhand at the time, actually, but literally it had only been out for a few years. So it can't have been on the secondhand market for long. But like
early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s. It was literally early 2000s, and I had that, and there was in the shop that they did really good quality used gear, and they had they got from studios that were shutting down really, and they sort of sold them on, and like I was buying a few things, and they had like a Rode Classic valve one, and that sounded phenomenal as well. I just loved the sound of it. And I was like, oh, God, I really could take both of these, but I didn't have the money for that. And something in me told me that the Neumann would be it was so low on its self noise. It was going to work on so many things, and it might not have quite the character of something like the Classic Tube, but then would probably work well on lots of different sources. And I mean, I've used this mic so much. It's insane. I've used it for vocals. I've used it for, miking up strings. I've used it for like, I think I even used a pair for overheads once. That was probably luxury. Used it on a tom, which was a terrible idea. I spent my entire time just hoping the drummer wouldn't hit it. As you can see, there's a few dents actually in it. Yeah. Like it's seen a few, few accidents.
You want a large diaphragm to capture low end, like it's not a bad mic for that.
No, exactly. No, and it does a good job on vocals. It might not be the obvious YouTuber's mic, I wouldn't have thought, but like, again, used properly, it works really, really well for that as well. So yeah, it's great on most people's vocals. I mean, everyone's got a different timbre to their voice, and not every singer is going to sound great on a TLM 103 in comparison with maybe a different microphone, but it's it's worked very well for me. So I'm a fan. I'm a Neumann fan in general, but unfortunately, I don't have a cupboard full of U47s. I would like one, but
That's
mm,
that'd be in an expensive cupboard.
it would. It would.
So
Uh,
is that running through your Apollo?
Mm. It is running through my Apollo with an LA2A stuck on it and a little bit of the precision channel strip EQ on it, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Just
so,
tiny bit.
so
Yeah. Mm.
how many inputs does your Apollo have? Two or more?
Well, it's got two, but like it's got an ADAT input as
Okay.
well, so you can use it for like 10 in total, I think, because you can put an ADAT one on as
Is
well.
that your main I/O? Is that the one you use in
Yeah,
your studio
it
there?
is.
When somebody comes in with drums, you obviously have a different A to D converter that you're doing ADAT into the Apollo. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, if I actually, bizarrely enough, if I do anything like that, I just I use my Behringer XR
Oh, okay.
because I've suddenly got 18 inputs and they're
Okay.
great. So there you go. I don't need, anything. I can do headphone outputs and everything. So if I'm doing anything with larger amounts of, musicians than the sort of standard 2 in, 2 out that a lot of the time I'm using sort of writing here. But yeah, just use the XR and it's brilliant. I take it out on location as well and record people and sort of like do some tracking of drums in other places and things like that. I've got some great recordings like that. Yeah, just works
Awesome.
brilliantly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say that just that's another kind of revolution that's happened is the whole digital console thing. PreSonus makes a really cool one.
Yeah.
That and they haven't released a new one. It's just the same old Live 32S
Yeah,
or
they're like,
whatever,
yeah.
and
Mm,
it's been around forever, but it's so cool because they have their own kind of form of Dante, and it's not really theirs, but that kind of thing.
mm.
And then you got tons of inputs coming in, the USB to a computer if you want. But the coolest thing that they've done, I've looked at the Yamahas and the Behringers and the PreSonuses and everybody who makes Alan Heath.
Yeah.
And these guys like figured it out. They have, if you have an SD card, you can plug your SD card straight into the console and you can hit record and it will record ISO tracks to the SD card.
I know. That's incredible. Yeah.
And because they make their own DAW software, it also records all of your compressor settings, all the things. So when you take that SD card out, you pop it into your computer, then it pulls up all the compressors and everything with all of your
Onto your
tracks
door.
and in their DAW.
That's phenomenal.
And so,
Yeah,
but the tracks are raw. You can still.
yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I love
Nice.
that idea. That's a
it's
great idea.
cool, and I don't understand
Yeah.
why the other manufacturers haven't
No.
stolen it. Allen and Heath kind of do that. They have sort of a way, but man, PreSonus and they're sort of like Behringer. They've been around for a long time. They've doing their thing. Um, but if I had to do it all over, I'm Yamaha in my studio right now, but and mainly because of the integration with Dante. But man, Dante is such a headache. If you don't know networking, you're really screwed.
Mm. I
Which
used to use the Focusrite ISA 1 I had, which is their kind of like a really nice, clear sort of preamp. But it's weird, isn't it, with preamps and things like that? It's like, I think I before that I'd had like a Focusrite Voice Master, and then I went to having a Focusrite Platinum Twin, actually. And I loved both of the Focusrite silver units, and I didn't really love the ISA 1. I just found it boring. It just sounded very like a clean preamp, but like didn't feel like it was imparting anything to the sound particularly. It recorded it well done. But like but I loved there was something a bit squidgy about the optical compressor that was in the Focusrite stuff. There was something you could some nice character buttons you could put in a kind of tube character, and you could add a little bit of saturation in there. You could do all kinds of stuff on the channel very quickly and or you could keep it very clean. But and you could switch between switching the sort of air in, I think, which added a sort of little air lift on it. And,
Right.
but it was just so easy to get. And I used to use this so much on say an acoustic guitarist and a vocal, and they could both be going through that. And, you could just get a really nice sort of vibey sound very quickly with no sort of latency or anything like that. And, there were good monitoring options off it if you wanted to do that. So, yeah, and track things really cleanly, but with a little bit of vibe on them. And I do like that in general. I mean, even if I'm tracking stuff through the Apollo here, I'll often use a few plugins or something to just give it a little bit of vibe going into the DAW and actually track it with that, not like wild EQs or something like that.
Right.
That's bad news, but you don't want to go making all your decisions before you mix and that sort of thing.
Right.
But I think it came from working with analog as well. Back with an R8 or something, you'd have to kind of EQ or work into the tape machine. And I got a bit more used to that. I'd do that in the studio. It'd be I'd know I'd need to do a little bit on a kick drum or something.
Yeah.
And I'd do that and track with the sound that I thought was pretty much what I was going to need on the mix. And so I would be making some decisions on my way in. And that tends to be something I think's fallen by the way a little bit with tracking through DAWs. Is we tend to sort of just put something in and go, all right, yeah, I've put the mic in the right place and I'm just going to hit record, and then I'll use loads of plugins later to sort it out. And I'm not a great fan of that. I'm a great fan even when I'm writing something like synthwave within the DAW. I'm going to try and choose the sound that is the sound that's I feel is right and has got the right frequency balance and it's going to sit in the mix. So I'm constantly thinking about mixing as I'm recording, so that the mix is being partly done, really. And by the time you put the faders up and you pan and everything else, just get a balance, it's actually sounding like, music or like a record at that point. And then you're going to do some more stuff to it. But it's not like you just record anything, all flat, all dull, all uninteresting, half-baked sounds that don't really work with each other or collide with each other, and then go, all right, I'll sort it all out now with loads of plugins. That's not the way I think at all. So
I think the first time I saw that, what you're talking about, is when somebody was showing me ADATs, and for the first time through an analog board, and they had two ADATs chasing each other, and they were like, yeah, you can bring up any individual channel you want. Just bring them all up to Unity. And I brought them all up to Unity, and it was already mixed. And I was like, oh, well, that's handy, and that somebody kind of went ahead and they were like, you know what? The toms don't need to be, I don't need everything I need out of the tom, because ultimately in the mix, they're going to be here. So I'm just going to put my preamp's going to be there. That's how I'm going to track them, and it was just a sort of an eye-opening experience that well, if I get everything close to how I want it when I track it, then I mean, I don't have to completely put a ring on it, I don't have to completely say, this is how much EQ,
Yeah.
Get it close, then there's something really terrible about having so many options in post. I see this with Arri cameras, where you can record what they call flat. And it's basically you're not committing in the visual realm where your contrast is and all that stuff. Same thing with audio. You just have, if you're just recording flat, then when you're done, you haven't inspired yourself throughout the process to do anything else with it. And then you're kind of like, well, now what? Gosh, it would have been nice if I'd have done this thing.
Yeah.
Those musicians are gone now. So.
Yeah. And when you're working with a whole group of musicians, I think as well, they're all sitting down there in the studio and they've got their headphones on, or they're up in the control room listening, and they want to feel a vibe. And we were talking about that very near the beginning of this conversation. And they want that snare drum to excite them. They want to hear that snare drum sounding good. They don't want to go, oh, well, it's going to sound a lot better by the time you've triggered something and you've layered this and you've added something else later on. If they get that excitement, like you do when you're playing a good gig and things are sounding good on the stage and you get excited about it, you kind of want to get that in the studio. At the same time, you do, of course, have to be careful that you are getting sensible recording levels, that you're not over coloring things that you're going to then have to worry about afterwards. So you've got to be cautious, but at the same time, I began to feel more certain about those decisions as time went on and go, that is what I want to do to that floor tom. That is, and I guess that's experience, really.
And I've always hated the idea and tried to never be the guy who says, "Oh, it's going to sound a lot better in the mix." Yeah, just wait for it, because at some point you're just like, I'm a shitty car salesman, I'm lying to you. Like, I have no idea. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
So Tim, with the Isle 9 and the stuff you put out under Tim Benson, I mean, what are you currently working on? What's the future plans on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently, a lot of efforts been channeled. They really have been for quite some while into Isle 9 now, and I'm still working on that. I've got a new release coming out at the end of this month. I was kind of aiming this year to manage to do a release, I think, every single month of the year, sort of try and do on the Isle 9, do sort of like 12 singles at least. But I keep working on an album to release for Isle 9, but the problem is I keep then sort of stealing it by releasing singles off of it, and then it never becomes an album, because I don't want the album to just be a compilation of singles. I want it to have a load of fresh stuff. But then if I write a good track, I'm like, oh no, I put that out as a single, but then I'm stealing my album, aren't I? So yeah, I need to
increase your goal to 2 tracks a month, and one's for the album.
One's for the album. That is exactly the case. Yeah, I think you're dead on the money there. So that is what I need to be doing, really. So I'm trying to sort of work on that. And outside of that, it's funny you should mention the sort of Tim Benson side of things, which I feel like for years and years, I've got tons of recordings of songs, band-based stuff, all kinds of different bands I've done. But yeah, my writing and guitar playing and stuff like that. And I really, in my head, I have a vision to like release some of that stuff just under my own name, probably artist name, my songwriting. And then at some point, what I really want to do is gather that stuff and then go and work somewhere nice, and do some tracking, with a band, actually hash it out with some great musicians I know and get them involved and do a live thing that's not just me doing all the parts, which I can do, but I know that there'll be something added by really getting others involved and putting that together. So I really hope that side will start to happen this year. It's just a matter of time, though, because I've got the constraints of mixing and mastering for clients, which I'm doing all the time, and working with people, and then trying to do my own music on top. And I do quite a lot of stuff which is more like composing. Did a film where I did a ballet. I've done various bits and pieces of composing for people. So that's also in there, and can suddenly sort of come up. Somebody wants me to write music for something, and I love doing that. But again, that steals a bit of your creative energy and time from going, right, I'm going to release this. So yeah, right. But I am loving the fact that, you can just go, yeah, I want to put this together and release it, and it's so much easier to do than it ever used to be. So
I say do that. And if you need a bass player, I know a guy named Mark down the road.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
I have a logistic question for you. So when you release music, and say you're going to get it on Spotify or whatever, they're pretty straightforward about not just anybody can just sign up and you have to be I forget what the verbiage is, but it's like you have to be with a music company or somebody
A
a
distributor.
distributor. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
they don't just let Joe Blow upload his WAV file.
No, you have to go through a distributor, sort of DistroKid, whoever it might be,
So
to
you're
put
using
your
those
music.
guys, okay?
I'm using them, but I've used quite a few actually. Bizarrely enough, I really decided no, I'm not going to use DistroKid in my kind of like sort of willful way. I was like, there's got to be somebody else. I'll go to all these, and I
CD
went to
baby.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I actually stayed away from all these big major sort of ones and thought, no, I'll find this really cool independent sort of distribution company. I used Horace Music, a UK based one. I put my music out with them, and in some ways a nice company, but in other ways, all kinds of things that are actually problematic about doing it. It is very difficult unless you're a musician and you start. You actually just start and you put stuff out. I think as you put stuff out, you start to realize what's good or what's bad about what people offer. And to be quite frank, I don't think any one of them that I've discovered yet, and I hear the same from other people, is absolutely fantastic, absolutely brilliant. There are pluses and minuses between what they all offer. But basically, they pretty much all offer the same thing of getting your music on all of the platforms, and most of them now, I mean, CD Baby do more of a kind of thing where you just pay for your release as you make it, and then you don't pay again. And then other ones like do a sort of thing where it's unlimited releases, like DistroKid do, but you sort of pay a sort of yearly subscription or whatever. But like, yeah, there are pluses and minuses. I think one thing I hadn't thought of was the amount of stuff of collaborating with other musicians, which happens a lot in synthwave, and that's great, but when you collaborate with other people, you've got to do splits, and that seems to be, some distributors don't really support it at all. Other distributors do have ways of supporting it, but then the artist has to join them in order to get the split, or this, that, or the other, or some of them stop you getting the money until it's over a certain amount, or there are all sorts of things, and it's a bit of a minefield. But like, I think one of the things with something like DistroKid, unfortunately, is like, whether you love them or not, they make it a very simple process. It's very quick, it's reasonably cheap, and to be honest, so many other people are doing it and are on DistroKid that collaborating is very easy, because you collaborate between other DistroKid artists, and you go, oh, right, you're on DistroKid. Oh, you're right. There we go. Send them a split. The split all happens and it's really quick. So yeah, so that works. It works easily. It's quick and easy. And it is like some of these companies, again, like we find this a lot, don't we? I think you'd agree with me that like when you're in the modern world, everything's fine until it's not fine, and you actually have to speak to someone, and then you try and speak to someone only to be stuck with a chat bot, and then after the chat bot you get an email that didn't make any sense anyway, and that was where a small company like Horace were fantastic. I could call them up and actually talk to them, so that was great. That was real people behind my distribution. But the trouble was as well that they're such small players, they weren't really very effective at actually the distribution things, and there were problems with splits and other things that weren't very good, and their back end to load tracks onto is terrible. So like, so yeah, I think there are plus and minuses, but you're right. You can't just walk in and just put something up straight away. But as for, there's no quality control on it really at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you can put up whatever you want. And I mean, that's great, because the gatekeepers that used to be there to stop you releasing aren't there. But of course, it does mean that there's a huge amount of music being released, and the quality control on it is not really there a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, yes, it's good and bad. The thing is, I ask this question mainly because I'm looking for someday somebody to be like, oh, here's the secret handshake that everybody should know, and nobody has it. It's always the same thing. It's my least favorite topic to talk about with music, is the business of music.
Yeah,
and I think I could see it in your demeanor and hear it in your voice when you're like, oh yeah, this bullshit again. Well, here it is.
yeah, I
So
think you might
I'm
be right
sorry,
there.
Sorry to
Mm.
ask the question.
No, it's a
It's
very
it's my own.
pertinent question. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, have this conversation quite a lot with musicians who sort of maybe are sort of younger than me and will be like, oh, but it's all, yeah, it should be like this. And it's so sort of bullshit all the way it is. And they're complaining about things sometimes about the music industry and like, oh, like the fact that Spotify's not paying us now for when we get under 1,000 streams and all these sorts of things on something. And on one hand, I totally agree with everything they're saying. And they're saying it from musicians' point of view that so much of it doesn't feel fair to us as musicians and artists. On the other hand, I remember a thing where really, unless you got signed to somebody, and even when you got signed, it wasn't a guarantee that anything really serious was going to happen, or you were going to see any of the money for years.
One step closer to getting screwed.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, one step closer to getting screwed. Yeah, so I just sort of feel at least it's in my hands. It's in my hands. I make the decisions. I put what I wanted to promo or don't put what I wanted to promo. I, I put out what I want to put out. I make my own creative decisions, and I can reach the world within days with my music, and that wasn't something that I foresaw perhaps ever happening. So I do love that, in my lifetime, things have changed immeasurably in being able to put out music and reach people within limits. It is hard to sort of push that past a certain, I think you start to hit a ceiling where you probably do start to go like, I need industry support here. But of course, if you get up to a certain number of monthly listeners and you build that grassroots following, a bit like you did when you were toiling around doing gigs, trying to attract people. But like if you can build that up to enough, you can get major labels interested and maybe people who genuinely have something to offer you and can do something with your music. There are a lot of really enthusiastic independent labels, some of whom really support artists hugely. I'm not trying to have a go at independent labels, but there are also a lot of smaller independent labels that realistically can't really do much more for you and your music than you can do yourself. And a lot of the time I don't know that they're preying on people, but they are kind of, going, it's a numbers game, I think, for them sometimes.
They're just a squirrel trying to get a nut.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we all complain about content creation and go, oh, why do we have to create content to get people to like us? And I wish they just loved our music without it. But, it's why do I have to lug a Marshall stack around rubbish gigs in, London, like toilet gigs in London? I mean, the answer is, there's always pain in it. There's always paying your dues one way or the other. So,
right.
I always dreamed the first time that I heard a guitar played through GarageBand on an iPad, I always thought, wait a second, I don't need a Marshall stack.
No,
I can lug this thing and direct box into it, but then you're at the mercy of some dude running monitors. But there's always that in the back of my mind, like, one of these days, all I need is my guitar,
Yeah. And that those kind of things have become a reality that, I was talking to someone this morning about how the Marshall stack no longer has to go out anywhere. And, in fact, we can just use a modeler and, get great guitar sounds. But although there was something nice about,
Yeah, exactly. No, if you become a rich and famous musician, you are going to make all of your roadies haul that stuff and watch.
Oh, yeah,
stage.
Yeah.
Be like, we're going to turn those knobs.
But I liked your, I'm going to say, positive perspective on all the things that you can do today. And thinking back, teenage me would not have believed that all of that would have been possible sitting in a chair in your bedroom.
No.
And I think I need to, every once in a while take a breath and step back and embrace the good with the bad. There's a lot of crap that comes with it, but there's always crap. Doesn't matter. There was crap back in the day where there was
Hmm.
the crappy bars, the roadies, the dude he threw up on the mixer, whatever.
Oh,
But
since
in
we
some
have you,
sense, I miss the pain.
right,
Know?
right.
Well,
It's
you
almost
sound
too
like,
easy.
yeah, that's why you want to buy a profit, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Let
I
me,
think I think I miss the pain of being under the desk, working through the spaghetti to figure out where the short is, and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
yeah,
So
it's
that
part of it.
it's its own form of yoga. It keeps you in shape. So let me ask you, Tim, because I forgot to ask you while you were talking about it.
Mm,
If you're mostly in the box now, and you're doing
yeah,
VSTs.
yeah.
So the one problem that we've talked to with some of our guests is that that's great, except for you did something with VSTs 5, 6, 10 years ago,
Mm.
and it is no longer supported, but you had this amazing track, but you want to change this one thing. How do you future proof that today? Or do you do like one of my friends does, and he's like, this is the finished wave file, and it shall live in infamy, and we don't change it, and we never go back. We only look forward. Or do you print stems or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, the sensible answer is to print stems, isn't it? Of certainly of VSTs is just like is to go through your project when you've finished and convert all VSTs to like stems. Um, so that's the sensible. My engineering answer would be that is what you do, and then it's there, and you've got the WAV file, and it doesn't matter if the VST has disappeared.
I was
I think
thinking a butt.
yeah, there is a but. I think the but is life is too short half the time, and you just sort of go right. That project's done, is it? Right, that's done. Let's move on. And and within reason, I think as well. If you've got the MIDI for things, you're just like, well,
Close. Yeah.
that plugin might not be around and we might have to chuck it through another B3 or B4 sound alike kind of thing. But I mean, it's going to be a different VST piano, but is it going to sound all that different than this VST piano? So for a lot of things, I think the difficulty is where you've got very signature sounds that like you might be very hard to recreate again. And there is where I think you probably ought to go like, I don't really know that we're ever going to be able to make this sound again.
Yeah.
Let's just print this down. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if it's a piano, it's a string sound. I mean, within reason, I'm just a bit like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
think I've evolved over that because who's ever been to a live show and there's a unique sound on the album, and then at the
Yeah.
live show you're going, that's not the sound.
yeah, yeah,
You're like that's that's the part, but that's not the sound. And
no,
it's because it was an analog thing they did in the studio, and then they came back and they're like, well, I think this sounds similar to it. I mean, they don't care. That was a
no,
moment frozen in time that you've heard over and over and over again, so that's what it should be in your head. But
yeah,
the original artist doesn't care.
no,
Like you're saying, to them, it's like a piano. They all sound different, but it's a piano, so who cares?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
my question to you is, what would your dream channel strip sort of from microphone into the DAW? What would that look like? What's your favorite mic? What's your favorite
Yeah.
three? What's your favorite A to D? What's your favorite?
Yeah. Probably if I was really to dream one up, like a Neve 73, something like that on the preamp, I do like the actual, I'm not, it's sacrilegious, I know. I'm not a massively Neve EQ fan. I don't love Neve EQ all that much, but like sweet top end, but like I'm not mad on it overall. But like I really do love the Neve Pre, which would probably be up there. Although, so you could almost, if you were really dreaming it up, you could have it swappable with an SSL. There we go, swappable. But like, so probably something like that on the Pre, and then it would go into, I mean, I've got very used to the sort of digital kind of things like Fab Filter and things like that, these kind of EQs now. But like, I mean, if we were going back, this strip was more of an analog nature, I would probably go for an SSL style EQ. But then I certainly love the SSL filters, like for low end and whatever. Like it's great. Their sort of high pass filter. So that's really good. But like I would love a pool tech in there as well. So can I squeeze a pool tech in? Because I'll use the pool tech a load.
I
So
mean,
almost like
it's lottery money,
almost,
so it's whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I love a pool tech, and then I would probably, say after that, some form of saturation. I mean, I love having some saturation on a channel. There's a lot of different types out there, but there's actually the stuff that's built into the channel strip on Cubase now is really good. I love their 3 little different sort of types of sort of saturation that tube and
it used to be from the old Magneto VST,
yeah, the
right?
Magneto, and I found it's really good. It's pretty useful. So some form of saturation in there, and then after that, I mean, we're into compressor territory, aren't we? And that's like, LA2A 1176. I'm back on all the classics, I guess. I love the DBX 160 when it comes to like bass and toms and things like that. I'm a real fan of that. So I in fact DBX compression I quite like. Full stop. I had an LX20 that I lost, but I loved that. So yeah, I would definitely have some DBX compression in there, as well as the option of more like a 76 type or an LA2A type. Those are, give me those 3 compressors and most things come out sounding pretty good out the other end of them.
And then we're going into what kind of analog to digital converter and then into what DAW?
Well, I mean, it depends how pristine you want to be on the A to D, but like an Apogee or something like that, something really, really clean, I guess, is probably what you want on the conversion. I mean, I like the Apollo stuff. I like the, I used to have Raider sort of RME stuff. I used them for years, and I think they would probably be my choice, but like they're really, really clear. So if I was going for an A to D, it would probably be an RME A to D, and then I would go into into trusty old Cubase, I'm afraid. So yeah,
Big Cubase, and then to back way up, what favorite microphone, like all around general purpose, and you can anyone in the world.
Go. Well, if you can get a Sony 800 or whatever it is, that insane microphone which costs about 15 grand, they're pretty good.
We hope.
Yeah, they're pretty good. A C12 would be up there, or a U47 would be up there. So that's a bit of a choice of microphones there, but depends though.
And who would be singing into that?
Who would be singing into that? Oh God, who would be singing into that?
Live or dead, doesn't matter.
Man, that's hard.
Well, yeah, that is hard. That is a tough one, actually. If you're doing some rock, you might have Eddie Vedder or that kind of sort of thing, like a real sort of classic rock voice, haven't you? But
he's around. He's not doing much.
No, he's not doing much, is he?
They tour every once in a while.
Yeah. I love that. But then there's the sort of whole sort of smoky vocal brigade. Oh, I tell you, a vocalist I absolutely love, Shaka Khan. But there we go. Like early Shaka Khan, Rufus and Shaka Khan. It's very, very funky stuff. Like I think people know her for her 80s stuff, but her 70s stuff. Diamond, yeah, but that's a totally different voice. It depends what record I was making. There are records I'd make that she would have to steer well clear of, but there are other ones where I absolutely love her voice. So
that's a great choice.
Yeah, she's amazing. But because that smoldery vocal, and she's also got that incredible power in there. So yeah, there we go. What was the other question? Was there another one, or have I answered them all now?
I thought of one, and it's kind of silly. speaking of smoky vocals, I'm a big fan of Sting, but I'm just wondering, since he's
Oh
from
yeah.
over there, are y'all just over him? Like he's like, ugh.
Oh no, I absolutely huge fan of Sting. Yeah, I know some engineer used to work on some of his stuff, but like he's oh yeah, it's just one of the most outstanding songwriters ever, I think, and I mean, in stunning musician in every way, and in whatever he touches, and his vocal is just phenomenal. And I always think it's funny that people sort of say about Sting, like, oh, but yeah, he's not a very good bass player, is he, mate? And I go like, what planet are you on? Like, have you ever tried to play like one of his bass lines, which are perfectly formed and beautiful in their own way, and then sing like Sting over the top of it? And it's like, it's
Well,
just impossible half the time. Yeah.
and what are these people? Are these people like, oh, Geddy Lee, that's the guy? But like, have you
Yeah.
heard Geddy Lee's voice? But
Yeah.
also, there's some things about bass, I think, that it really doesn't need to be upfront,
Mm.
just in general. And the best bass lines are the ones that sit in the pocket and that help the song groove.
Mm.
And it just, they need to be right where it needs to be. And I think that's
Yeah.
exactly what Sting does is he makes a bass
Yeah,
line
exactly.
that
Oh, and going back onto vocalists, because I feel like I've left him out. I would have David Bowie in there, most definitely.
oh, all right.
Yeah, I have always thought that he's just got an incredible control over, had an incredible control over his voice. He could sort of make it do all. It was like he was a million characters in one. He could just go from one thing to another, and I love that. I mean, just as someone like Bono can just stand up to a mic and have that incredible presence that he's got. But like, he's sort of almost a one-trick pony. He sort of does Bono like all the time, and he's brilliant. And you could say that of Eddie Vedder as well. Like, but yeah, Bowie just like was a chameleon with his voice, and I think that's something. I love that sort of. He'd be like sort of smouldering at the bottom of sort of China Girl, and then he'd be like, really a powerful side would kick in as well. So he's not, I think, the obvious vocalist choice in some ways, but like maybe a great songwriter, but not everyone would choose him for his vocal. But yeah, I think he had something very special about that vocal. It was a clever vocal. There we go. Mm.
That's awesome. Anything else, Mike?
Well, those are great choices, and as far as David Bowie and Sting, I think they're great choices for the reason that they understand production. At least, I mean, the others may too, but they understand
Yeah.
production
Yeah.
to almost like a Michael Jackson level, where that would just add something else. It's not just a voice into a mic. That process would be crazy. I remember I was very big into film, and there was a film in probably 2000, Mike Figgis, called Time Code. It was basically experimental, where they had digital cinema was coming into its own, and he had 4 handheld digital cameras, and this was done as kind of a one act play, and the screen was split with the 4 things, and it was recorded live. Or I mean, live to tape, but all simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. But the point of that was Sting, the soundtrack was very jazzy, and Sting had a track on there. And I remember reading about the production, and they all went to his place. He said he had a roaring fire in the fireplace. They're all set up in this big room, and it was just like we were talking about at the very beginning, the way to relax people, or it wasn't this frigid studio thing. He's like, yeah, screw it. And when I read that, I went back and listened to it, and you can hear the fire crackling on the recording.
Wow.
And I'm going, okay, that's just crazy. But he's not trying to do anything anymore. He's like, hey, we're all going to have a jam session, and we're just going to hit record.
Yeah.
I'll say
it was pretty neat.
My favorite documentaries is I think it's called Bring On the Night or Dream of the Blue Turtles or whatever. But it's about him getting his first band together after he stopped doing the Police.
Yeah.
Just before their big first opening night. And in this, I'm going to call it a castle. I don't know any better, but it's a giant room, and it is not a recording studio. you know, but they have put all sorts of their gear all set up, and
Mm,
they are just, it's just awesome to hear them rehearse for this big show that they're going to do. And it sounds amazing. And you just see the kind of musicianship that they are. Like at some point, somebody brings up the Flintstones, right? The cartoon that we all saw. And they're like, oh, how'd that song go? And they all just kind of figure it out on the fly. And you hear Sting singing
The Flintstones.
Flintstones, and it's just
oh, the Flintstones.
nuts. And it's
Yeah,
just the
yeah.
greatest thing.
Mm,
I love that so much. And
mm,
it's like, if anything made me want to be a live musician at any point, it was watching that and going,
yeah,
that looks fun. I'd like to do that.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, who was it I was thinking of just then? Yeah. Oh, Phil Lynott. Do you remember that? Thin Lizzy ever?
Oh
Thin
yeah,
Lizzy?
Thin Lizzy.
Yeah, yeah.
I
God.
didn't know the name.
Yeah, yeah. Phil Lynott is a bass player and singer. Again, like Sting, bass player singer. I don't know what it is with bass player singers. I've like worked with tons of bass player singers in my life because Tom, who sung and played in Beats Working, the band that I was in for years and years and years. You look them up on YouTube, Beats Working band. But like it's sort of cover stuff is what we did. But like absolutely phenomenal singer, but bass player as well. So like yeah, it's weird. Like I kind of love bass player singers, but like I know, like you know, a lot of the time people sort of think, oh, it's hard to play the bass and sing, but there are quite a lot of notable, fantastic bass players and singers. But Phil Lynott was one. You know, I loved his stuff. And Thin Lizzy, I think it was the guitar playing that sold me on that. But you know, I like people like Martin Knopfler as well. Like
Oh,
brilliant, brilliant. But like again, I don't know whether you really want him as your vocalist because he can only sing about four notes and they're quite low. But you know,
yeah, but
but they're
it's real
great.
fun. Yeah.
It's great,
Yeah, I
and
think
I
with him
mean
it's about how he sings and the
exactly.
lyrics, which are
The
just
lyrics and how he sings are phenomenal, aren't they? Absolutely, I love his vocals, but it's
nobody can pull it off but him.
Yeah,
no,
and
agree,
his
agree.
guitar playing's pretty great too.
Oh, stunning. And I love his guitar playing. It's kind of in the vein of sort of the way I play myself. So, you know, but like I sort of play fingers and don't play with the plectrum. So kind of similar, but like I just don't have the royalties, unfortunately. Yeah.
Is there any questions you've dreamt up for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, either of you releasing your music and making music yourself, like at the moment, that would be interesting to know.
I'll speak for me, but I think some of this also with Mike, we were into this early years, teenage 20s, and then
Yeah.
life happened, and we've been kind of getting back into it, which was kind of the point of this was
Mm,
keep interest going, talk to people, what's going on, and I've learned a lot talking to people because I'm basically modernizing the gear that I use. And
mm,
I had to go from Cubase, I don't know what version I had way back when, and then I downloaded 13, and
yeah.
I'm lost. I'm going
It's a
through
big step.
tutorials again. I'm
Yeah.
going, what?
Yeah.
But so I have some stuff out there, but I'm really working on this kind of catalog of ideas and I just want to start
Mm,
like you. I need a more specific goal of like, but I want to just instead of collecting for an album, just start throwing stuff out there. Like
yeah.
here's one a month or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good place to start, I think. Yeah. What
Well,
about you?
a long time ago, I recorded my first album fresh out of high school with my garage band. We were called Who Knew, WHUGNU, because high
Mm,
school. And so then we came down to Austin and we did some live music, uh, played lots of places. And we were starting to make a name for ourselves, but then life happened to everybody. I think after we disbanded, we released kind of the second album that we were working on 10 years later or so, but we still have so much other stuff that hasn't been released. That's great. They're all
mm,
finished. It's just, a matter of putting it on Spotify. And so, really, the driving force behind that is me when I have time. And mostly, I'm going to call him my drummer, even though we haven't played together in decades. And he lives pretty close by, and every
Yeah.
once in a while he'll call up and say, "Mike, we need to just push go on this and
Yeah.
release it." And
Getting the
sort
band
of,
back together. Yeah.
well, and it's not really the band, because the former lead singer, like, he's gone on to do, like, he's played I think it was Conan O'Brien's late night show years ago. He's been written up in Rolling Stone a couple times.
Mm.
Like, his new band, he's what I would call a real successful musician,
Yeah.
doing, like, paying bills by playing music,
Yeah.
and among other things, he does other things.
But you have unreleased tracks that he was involved with, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think he would care,
No, but
at this
you
point.
you need to get him to redo the vocals on that, and then use his current status
I
to
mean, the
launch your
mixes and the
stuff.
mastering, they're
Mm.
done.
Yeah.
We
Mm.
have the finished stuff. We just need to push go. And I think what's holding me back is kind of thinking about how to release it.
Mm.
And so I don't know that the album is really the way to go. I think what you're doing, by releasing a song a month, is actually very smart. But I think the way that I want to do it is something like this. I'll call
Mm.
up one member or a couple members of the band, and we'll talk about this song and say, "Yeah, in this song, do you remember doing this? Do you remember doing that?" And just making sort of a vlog video and talking
Mm.
about parts of the song, and then say, "Well, it releases tomorrow," you
Mm.
know. And so you can find it on Spotify and
Mm.
whatever else. And I think that's kind of what we would have to do, because we aren't signed,
No.
And so it's our own little press junket sort of thing,
Yeah.
and just reach out to the social medias
Yeah.
and do it from there. I don't know if that's a good idea, but it seems like
I think so.
It's
Mm.
a great idea. The
Mm.
worst idea
Yeah.
is not doing any of it.
that's right, and that's the
I
problem.
completely agree with you, Mike. Yeah, and I would say that having for years not released my own stuff, mainly because I was so busy doing everybody else's. But like when I finally started releasing mine, it's changed my world. It really has. It's just
Really?
very different. Yeah, yeah, it's just very different. I mean, by no means am I not interested in producing other people still and working with other people. I love collaboration. I love working with other people and mixing and mastering and doing the stuff that I've learned all my life. But like but it's changed, yeah, things for me a lot, and like having that creative outlet. And I think obviously you don't just drop a track and it all goes wild. I mean, I was lucky that the first track I did actually get really well received, and I don't know, by luck more rather than judgment, I kind of worked out some ways of publicizing it, and I got it on some playlists. It kind of got somewhere, and I think it's got about 60,000 streams now, which wasn't bad considering I really didn't know anything about what I was doing in that way. I might have known how to produce it, but I really didn't know what I was doing in the publishing sort of, and promoting side. So, but it's really sort of awoken something in me, and a kind of desire to get on and make the next track and to do something new, and and I mean, if there were enough hours in the day, I'd just be writing music all the time in many ways if I could, and getting it out there. And I think the time is always now, because you don't know how long you've got left on the mortal coil. You don't know what's going on with the world, which is crazy enough as it is. And I sort of think like, God, what am I waiting for? The bomb might drop before I've Putin might eradicate me before I've actually got my album out. So it'd be nice to get it out,
Yeah. 2025 LFG. Let's effing go. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's great for everybody to just get it out there and not hide it too much. And if it's not your best one, never mind, do another one. Because social media will certainly forget about it. This is the world we're in. We churn it out, and your best thing is gone tomorrow a lot of the time. I mean, let's hope if it was really that good, then it will live on and it will have a life of its own. But
Well, I think that's a great message to go out on. So thanks for bringing that up. That's great.
Pleasure, guys. You take care of yourselves, won't you? And thank you ever so much. Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it, Tim.
Yeah. All right. All the best for now. Cheers.
Bye.
Mike's on my